the scary part about the R10 is that there's no recourse. It feels like there's a little bit of a gap in fraud fighting. The best way that I've always thought to understand a fraud scenario is to kind of think like a bad guy.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. My name is Jared Wright. I'm the head of marketing for Chargebacks 911. For those of you not familiar, Chargebacks 911 helps merchants prevent chargebacks and helps them recover revenue lost to fraud. I'm real excited today because I've got Steve Lenderman, who has spent the last 25 years fighting financial crimes. He currently serves as the head of fraud prevention at iSolved. Steve has led fraud prevention teams at PayPal, ADP, and Barclaycard. He's the president of the Delaware chapter of Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. His presentations on synthetic identity fraud and fintech fraud trends have been top-rated at major industry conferences. He also trains law enforcement and agencies in the latest fraud schemes. Steve, I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
So just to kind of get us started, you and I had a conversation the other day, and you had talked a lot during that conversation about ACH R10 fraud. This was something I wasn't aware of. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it's been an ongoing problem for several years now, mostly because money movement these days is mostly taking place through ACH, right? When cash was king, some would say cash still is king, but when cash was king, you had robberies, right? And when everybody was doing checks, right? And when credit card fraud, there was credit card fraud, right? And so just a matter of the channel the money moves. As the money moves through different channels, the fraud follows. And so what we have happening in ACH transfers is the ability, to dispute those like you would a merchant transaction, right? For Chargebacks 911, there's essentially an ACH chargeback in theory called an R10, which there are several reason codes that NACHA, who's the originator of the ACHs, right? They're the governing body of ACH money movement. They have several reason codes around fraud, and one of these, the most prevalent, is the R10, which essentially is unauthorized. It did not authorize the transaction. And so what bad guys have figured out, like anything else, is they've taken something that's been designed to protect the consumer, right, and now use it to their advantage, right? And so there are some rules around the R10s, when you can use them, how you can use them, and timing frame. But that's essentially like how an R10 was designed to protect the consumer from fraud. But now we're seeing it being used to actually commit fraud in both first-party and third-party tactics.
Maybe this was just me that had this, but I know at least some merchants are under the impression that ACH, one of the advantages of an ACH transaction is that it doesn't have all of the chargeback liability that a standard credit card transaction has. But you're saying that that's not true, that ACH can receive essentially chargebacks.
Yeah, absolutely. There are several rules around and regs that NACHA has implemented around fraud, right? Because the amount of money being moved through ACH channels, right, the bad guys are going to be there. So while the traditional Visa, MasterCard, Amex, Rails, and chargebacks are a little more robust, the rule book, I think, for NACHA is only a couple hundred pages versus the issuer is a couple thousand pages, right? There's still certainly some risk for merchants who may believe, ACH is, once I get the ACH, it's my money, right? I got it now. No, that's not true, right? It can certainly be removed through an R10 reversal and leave the merchant, right, or any other organization essentially out the funds. And the scary part about the R10 is that there's no recourse, right? In chargebacks, for example, you have arbitration, or you have it's been a little while since I'm doing chargebacks, but that mediator stage between, right, where you can dispute back and forth and kind of mediate. When an R10 is initiated by a bank, the funds are clawed back from that bank, and the bank that is now out those funds, or the merchant that's out those funds, you have no recourse. There's nothing you can do to recover those funds.
Really?
It's gone. Yeah.
That goes against, I think, what the common understanding for a lot of people are. Is it that you think are these R10 disputes, Is it a newer feature that maybe wasn't historically part of
So
the
the R10 fraud trend is not a new trend. The R10 rule has been around for several years. Um, I think what we're seeing now is the R10 being used by not just third-party fraudsters, but by first-party fraudsters, right? And so, originally a third party is a bad actor, right? Just like a normal credit card transaction or check forward, someone you do not know uses your account information to makes a purchase or makes a transfer without your knowledge, right? And so that's pretty much what we would see happening, which is why the R10 really kind of came around, right? Was to stop people, because if you just had your routing number and account number, like in theory, I could withdraw from your account, right? It's not like you had to have the CVV and expiration and all these different things that were built into credit card transactions, for example. If I can just get ADA and DDA off a check, which are floating everywhere, right? I can essentially move money out of your account.
That's really interesting. So, and the idea that a merchant can't represent the transaction or can't defend themselves
Yeah,
is really
yeah.
problematic. So that's
Burden of
definitely a big
proof.
blind spot.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
burden of proof is all on, and there really isn't much burden essentially, right? The consumer says, I did make this transaction, and quote unquote fills out a form that is nothing really there, right? And that's it, right? There's no, there's nothing there, right? And so it's super easy to commit. It's very rarely tracked. You will see some habitual offenders, which I'm sure banks will remove from their portfolio, but they just go to another bank and open up another account and do it over again, right? And
Hmm.
so there's definitely an ease of use of abuse, excuse me, not use, abuse of the R10.
So if I'm a company and I have, if I do enough ACH, I imagine there's going to be some liability to have an R10, filed against one of those transactions. What are some potential ways that merchants can identify R10 fraud and sort of separate it from the legitimate use, as you explained, where it's
Yeah,
somebody's been a
yeah.
victim and you've just been a part of that?
That's certainly going to be a challenge because the way the R10 works is an after the fact scenario, right? So a transaction takes place with a merchant with obviously an ACH payment, or with a bank from a bank to bank, where it's an ACH transfer of funds from one organization to another. Um, the caveat here is that just like Reg E and Reg Z, right? There's time frames around this, right? And so for the R10, the 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 individual has 60 days from the date of settlement of that transaction to make the claim, right? And so a legitimate business is thinking, well, hey, it's day 55, and that transaction took place a month and a half ago, and the money's mine, and just I can move on, right? And now all of a sudden on day 59 or day 60, right, this R10 comes in, and your money has disappeared out of your account, 5,000 or 2,000, whatever dollars it is, and you're like, what do I do here, right? So it's kind of a false sense of security, which makes it very difficult to detect because there is such a lag in this, right? Don't Typically the R10 threat actors wait until the very last portion of that 60-day window, just because they're doing this with multiple accounts, and there's it's almost like I call it like R10 kiting, right? They're doing it so many places, they got money moving from so many different accounts that they have a system and a schedule in place for that. Now, some potential detection would be, especially if you're in a bank account scenario where it's transfer of funds from one to the other, are very even dollar amounts, very scheduled kind of dollar amounts that don't really make sense for the type of account that's out there, right? If the average daily balance on an account, let's just say, is $1,000, and every 3 days they're moving 1,000 out, 1,000 in, 1,000 out, 1,000 in, 1,000 out, right? That doesn't really make sense in a bank account scenario. So I would think about something from a merchant perspective is you're seeing numerous purchases of this, maybe the same item over and over again in succession, whether it's daily succession, weekly succession, whether that be high dollar items as well, right? Potentially even like anybody who's selling like virtual items, right? Whether it's licenses for software or for gaming or something like, things of that nature, right? Where there really isn't a tangent physical item, that there's more high risk there from that perspective. Um, so yeah, it's anything like the patterns that just don't match your typical behaviors of a normal customer, right? Um, you know, like what is your average ACH payment, right? Look at your data. What's your data tell you? Like, okay, on average, people use ACHs probably for lower dollar transactions because again, if I'm using as a consumer, it's coming out of my checking account directly, right? I don't have the ability to kind of finance that for 30 days with credit card. So I would make again, maybe it's an assumption here, but I would say your average ACH transaction is probably a little lower on the lower side, a couple hundred, if not lower, versus, hey, why am I making a $5,000 ACH transaction, at a merchant that I'm brand new to, right? And buying some high-end equipment, what it might be. That's unusual, right? Like most people are going to probably use a credit card for that because of cash flow issues, other than rewards, for example, right? Very few of us are going to just do an ACH for 5,000 out of our account, right? So that's what I would say. I would look out like what's your norm and what's abnormal when you do ACHs. You can see that data for sure.
Well, that's really interesting, and I can certainly see how the ACH could be a blind spot, especially first-party fraud with ACH could be a blind spot for merchants. Another blind spot I know that a lot of merchants struggle with is account takeover fraud. And there's a lot of reasons why account takeover fraud doesn't really fit into the fraud defense, approach that a lot of merchants have. You've talked a lot about synthetic identity theft. Is account takeover? Is there a correlation between account takeover and synthetic identity theft? Are those related in any kind of way, or why don't you talk to me about account takeover?
Yeah, it kind of actually all ties into it, right? So you can use R10 in an account takeover with a synthetic identity, right? So you can kind of have this very diverse fraud ecosystem that you're working with. So, for example, traditional account takeover is I'm stealing Jared Wright's credentials, I'm logging into Jared Wright's account. I'm either going to make changes, right, or move money, or potentially make a transaction, right? In the old credit card days, we would see, fraudulent balance transfers to pay off someone else's account. We would see new accounts, new credit cards being ordered. You would see things of that nature, right? You didn't really see a lot of purchases on the credit card necessarily, right? Because you were just getting into the account to get the account information. But if I'm doing an account takeover of a traditional bank account, like a checking account, or maybe it's a crypto wallet, or maybe it's a peer-to-peer platform, for example, well, then I can start moving money around, right? And so, that's where it gets interesting, where I can, again, kind of double dip, move money via ACH from an account takeover, compromise an account, a bank account, move $1,000 out of the account to another account that's there, right? To an account that I control, right? And then because I'm in the account, I can then also do like an R10, initiate an R10, right? Because the bank thinks it's me and it's not me, it's the bad guy who's initiating the R10, get the $1,000 back, and then I can do it again, make another purchase with it, et cetera. So you can see where you can kind of bust out the scenario using the R10. Now, where account takeovers and synthetics kind of intersect is there's always this like, where do I send the money to, right? So, or how do I get it out of there, right? And so that would traditionally be to other accounts, and we know a favorite of account takeover transfers are fintechs, right? And nothing against fintechs in general, right? But they traditionally are a little lower KYC, a little easier to open accounts with, which is a perfect playground for synthetics. Like a lot of fintechs are self-serviced. Again, they are not brick and mortar banks, right? They are self-service e-commerce banks essentially, right? And synthetics love this, right? Because we just become data, and that's all synthetic is data, and they can apply to open accounts there. So now I have an account takeover. I'm moving money out of an account, $1,000. I got to move it into an account that I control, which I control a synthetic identity because I now have an account at this fintech company, which is a synthetic identity. And then I can move the money from there to a crypto, for example, with synthetic. So you can see how you can really lay yourself. Like, I kind of have to laugh when I see indictments and individuals who are doing money muling and even doing some of this R10 ACH stuff. Like, and they're using their real information. I'm like, you're fools. Like, at least if you're going to be committing fraud, at least be good at it, right? At least, be a professional and get a synthetic and move money around and layer yourself. It just kind of cracks me up because synthetics, unfortunately, are still really easy to do, especially in the fintech space. Like, much more challenging in banking, but even synthetics in your world, in the merchant space, it's a joke. Like, I have multiple synthetic identities. They all have accounts at Target, Office Depot, Home Depot, Amazon, right? They all have accounts. There was almost no authentication. And then I can use those to do different things with my synthetics and make me look real because
Huh.
who doesn't have an Amazon account, right? Like everybody has an Amazon account.
Right.
Even my synthetics, right, have Amazon accounts.
Yeah, and you talked about the need to move the money out of the account that you take over. One of the other liabilities that I've heard people talk about is people use account takeover to make it easier to commit traditional credit card fraud, right? You have some stolen credit card numbers. If you go in the front door of a e-commerce website, you try to use that credit card number, there's a pretty good chance that there's going to be some fraud filtering and there's fraud layers that are going to detect that. Whereas if it's a customer that's done business with you before, that you have a relationship with, and they just log in and start making purchases, you may not scrutinize those transactions as thoroughly, and that person is able to get away with the credit card fraud that they probably would have been detected as a somebody that just signed up and tried to do it.
Yeah,
What are some technologies that people are either the fraudsters are using to gain access to the accounts?
yeah,
Is it kind of the same as it's always been, or is there new strategies and new technology that's merchants should be aware of?
yeah. Before we jump into technology, I just want to kind of piggyback on that comment there about so ATO and first party fraud are very difficult to detect from a merchant perspective in general, right? Because they look very similar, right? It's very difficult to determine intent in a first party fraud scenario, right? It's the true person's name, address, phone, like it's all of that. It's them, right? And they've had accounts for,
Yeah.
you say, for weeks, months, years, right? And ATO is similar concept. There's this false sense of security that you think you have the true relationship with the customer. So an ATO and a first party fraud are very similar from a risk detection perspective, right? It's tough to determine what's the intent here, or is this really my true client? Because everything looks and feels the same, right? So that kind of piggies back into the question like what kind of technology are threat actors using, right, to kind of get into this, this fraud, right? Is you know, I mentioned synthetics earlier, right? And I have a couple synthetics, and it took me a couple years to build my synthetics to where they are fully functioning. So that I've had them for a couple of years now. When I say a couple of years, they're 15 plus years in age, very well seasoned, very well displaced in the financial sector, to put it nicely. But for the fun of it, I really wanted to see, how technology could help me or help other synthetic threat actors in that perspective, right? And so the best way that I've always thought to understand a fraud scenario is to kind of think like a bad guy, right? And so I decided a few months ago to create a new synthetic, and um, I simply went into the dark deep web, of course, and used Worm GPT and Fraud GPT, which are nothing more than fraudulent LLMs like we have for Copilot and Genesis and Chat GPT, right? These are all LLMs, right? These are the dirty versions, the bad guy versions, essentially, right? And so with the right prompting, the prompting took me the most amount of time to get it right, but with the right prompting, these LLMs were able to create a fully functional synthetic identity in 7 minutes, right? Which took me weeks, if not years, to kind of get them up and running and mature. So that just tells you how the entry barrier to commit fraud because of technology like the LLMs that are out there has lowered the bar. Like, I mean, you can just step over it. It's not even a hurdle anymore, right? It's so easy. The tech has made it so easy to do that. I also think that as much self-service we've created as an industry, and we have great technology that's all there, and we move money faster. That's all also part of tech, faster rails, faster payments. I think all of that has also kind of, while it's been great for the consumer and convenient, it's also made a fraud environment much more, it's more effective and efficient, right? When I used to steal a check, right, I write a check, I wait 3 days for the check to count or to cash, for example, right? Now I'm doing ACH, and the ACHs even a couple of years back were processed overnight. Now they're processing ACHs daily. The limit, I believe, now is $1 million per transaction, right? Yeah, yeah, that's a really scary thing. You think about it, right? So I think that technology is really just, again, it's made it just as fast and efficient and effective on the good side. But I think on the bad side, it's also made it as fast and effective as efficient on the bad side, which has allowed these bad guys to do a lot of other things. Most of it really around scalability, right? The days of the quote unquote kid in the hoodie that doing the hack, those days are over, right? It's the kid in the hoodie who's writing the bots, right? Using the LLMs, the bots are doing the attacks, right? That's the significant difference. Now I can scale up with massive attacks across multiple ecosystems from one threat actor that before couldn't write code, right? Had to hire someone else to do the code. We called it fraud as a service, right? Somebody did this, somebody did that, someone did that, right? But no one had all the keys to the fraud puzzle. Well, now the LLMs and technology have all the keys to the fraud puzzle, so anybody can essentially do it at this point. It's
Okay. Now,
terrifying.
you said you've created synthetics. I assume that you're doing that for white hat reasons, but
Yeah, research purposes
those
only.
are so could you talk a little bit about that though? So
Yeah.
it's synthetic. Like I have a Gmail that I use for spam, right?
Yeah.
Like if I'm signing up for something and I don't want it. So, but that's that's something different, right? Like
A little different. It's the beginnings, right? And
what?
so I think anybody who
Yeah.
has created a Gmail address for, like I said, for spam stuff, or anybody in the financial services industry who does investigations or in law enforcement, we call them sock puppets. These are essentially accounts that we use to do investigations, right? So when I'm looking up a
Mhm.
threat actor or somebody I want to validate that who they say they are, and I'm using LinkedIn, for example, right? I don't want to use my real LinkedIn, even though it's on private, et cetera, right? I have a fictitious LinkedIn account that I use for operational security, right? Which allows me to do this. So that is the beginning of a synthetic, right? Where you're creating a digital identity. It can be social media, it can be retail accounts, obviously it can be Gmail accounts, it can be VoIP phone number accounts. And I think all of us, in some way, shape, or form, have some versions of a synthetic identity, right? That we're using for other purposes, mostly for, just to keep marketing stuff out of your boxes and operational security. The difference between a synthetic for that purpose and then using it for financial gain to commit fraud, there's where you kind of cross the line, right? Where you're actually using the identity to apply for accounts, to move money, to do things that you would essentially commit fraud with, to fraud, right? And so, there are things that honestly that I do that are jumping up and down on the line, to put it nicely. I have to move money around between the accounts. I need to look like I'm a real person. I need to make transactions, right? These are things that I do as a synthetic. I use some bots now to do it, thank God, because I can't keep up with it all. But that make me look real, but I'm also moving money. I am using a fictitious identity, and I've applied for bank accounts and have bank accounts and credit card accounts under these names that do not exist,
Wow.
right? So yeah, am I breaking the law? More than likely, to put it nicely, right? And I've had several conversations with numerous law enforcement agencies, and nobody understands what we're doing. Like my intention is not to commit fraud; it's really for quote unquote to understand how it works, and to be able to provide
Yeah.
those learnings back to law enforcement and other organizations, and hey, this is how it works, right? Because now I can see how to do it, right? Before we're purely guessing, right? Like, well, how do they do it? Well, now I can tell you. But there will be an end game
Yeah.
someday. I'm not sure what the end game is,
All
but there
that.
will be an end game.
Yeah. You're making me scared.
Hopefully that's good.
I always think about when you talk about fraud prevention and the technology and fraud, it's sort of like a tit for tat contest. But that's really like at a high level, at the merchant level or at the business level, they're not really involved in that arms race because if they're able to, get that fake account, if they're able to bypass all of those security metrics, the ability to get into, the ability to rip off a merchant's kind of,
Yeah,
I would imagine a little bit the easiest part of that.
yeah, yeah. I kind of think
Uh,
I think retailers and banks we are now playing checkers with the bad guy. I mean, chess. Excuse me. We were playing checkers and they were playing chess. Now I think that gap has closed significantly. I think we're both playing chess now, and I think our fraud prevention, whether it's in e-commerce or retail or banking or whatever the industry, insurance, healthcare, I think we are now thinking one step ahead, right? Like in chess, you're always trying to think what's your next move. I think the threat actors are thinking two or three moves ahead of us, right? And so there's still always going to be a chasing And it's just inherent, right? Like it's because they control, right? They're always the first move, and therefore they're always the at least one move ahead, right? And so they're poking and prodding, looking at controls and what limits are and things of that nature, and we're reacting to that, right? And so they're the one kind of controlling the game, to put it nicely. And
Yeah.
I think we'll always be in that scenario, no matter how much technology we get. Technology we get is great, but our technology is also regulated, right? The technology they use is not regulated, right? They can do anything they want, when they want, how they want. There's no controls, right? And that's a big hampering for us, which I think will keep us at least minimally at one move behind, but probably more like two or three.
Huh. So we're talking about the fraud blind spots, things that merchants aren't necessarily thinking about when they think about the fraud that they need to prevent. One of the things that we've talked a lot about is first party fraud, friendly fraud, chargeback fraud, and normally when we talk about it from the standpoint of you have a customer, they're unhappy, they feel, but it's usually like a one-off type of thing, right? It's a customer service tension. It's a sort of dissatisfied customer, but it's not a mass scale attack in the same way that third party fraud would be, right? It's usually one or two. At least that's the way that we usually talk about it. As I hear you talking about synthetic identities, are you aware of any sort of like first party fraud at scale that's going on? Chargeback fraud, somebody gets a credit card, buys a bunch of TVs, say they didn't buy it, that type of thing. Is that a viable
Yeah,
risk?
the e-commerce space, retail space is exactly my industry. So I would say anywhere that the ability to scale and 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 to make money, which is happening with first party fraud now, and you are seeing tutorials essentially on social media pages how to do that. They're gathering individuals how to do it, right? Seeing a lot of these gimmicks, to put it nicely, right? Where they recruit individuals to do like the ATM glitch thing, for example, right? There was no ATM glitch there, but they were able to convince a bunch of people, hundreds of people, not thousands, to believe there was an ATM glitch and go do this, and it really wasn't. So
I saw
I wouldn't see why people could not recruit through social engineering and the fact that humans are inherently greedy to make a quick buck.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a reasonable assumption. That's super interesting because it's, the growth of friendly fraud over the last decade has been, it's been very well tracked. We've done a lot of studies on it, and a lot of it's tied to what you're talking about, where it's sort of social contagion. The people share the tactics with their friends, say, look, you can get a free pizza, you can get a free iPhone, whatever it is.
Yeah,
Just call and say that you don't recognize the charge. And so, yeah, the the behavior is a learned behavior, and it is, the indicators are all
yeah.
going in one direction, that it's going to be a bigger and bigger problem for merchants.
It's definitely easier to do, as you
One of
mentioned, right? But like I've also come up with this
Yeah,
kind of little quote that I use around first party fraud, right? And we talk about the economic pressures that we're seeing on consumers, essentially, right? And so, especially around first party, I call it fraud for greed, which is just people just doing it because they wanted to do it, right? That's third party. People like you talked about there, just being greedy. There's fraud for need, like, hey, I really need that TV, or they justify it in some way, shape, or form that they need something. But I think that one of the driving factors we're seeing, and it's not really being accounted for, is the fraud for what I call feed, right? Where you have individuals who are committing fraud to pay to put food on tables, right? They're going to do something with Costco and Amazon, return something, and then get the money and then use that to go buy groceries or pay the mortgage or pay the car payment. And when you have that kind of social pressure, or that pressure as a parent or a human being to feed your family, you will do things you will not normally do, right? Which I think is a huge part of first party right now, is you have people who just would never have done this. If you asked them 2 years ago, but they've never done this. But if it comes down to feeding their kids, they're absolutely going to do it, like, and not feel guilty about it, really. And then unfortunately, it becomes no longer a feed thing, and that's because, hey, it becomes, I can do this now more often, right? It becomes acceptable, right? And that's what scares me the most, is that we're in a situation from that perspective.
Yeah, we just did a study on consumer sentiment, and one of the things that the cardholders that we surveyed said is that for them, they thought about a chargeback as like a refund, right?
Hmm.
So they didn't think about I'm going to go commit fraud or I'm going to go lie to my bank or I'm going to go, they thought about it as I want my money back. I wish I didn't buy this. So it's the same as getting a refund. It's the
Yeah,
same as, taking anything back to Costco or taking something back to the store.
yeah,
They didn't really differentiate between the two because for them, the end result's kind of the same. The process is kind of the same, right? You got to like fill out a complaint online or you talk to somebody on the phone. And so I think that's a big driver too, is, you combine the economic pressures that you've talked about with a sort of disconnect with the sort
perfect
of
storm.
yeah, like not having the idea that what they're doing is fraud. I think is given a lot of people that wouldn't, for example, you steal a car. They would be enticed to, be like, oh, I wish I didn't spend the money that I spent last month. Let me go ahead and take care of that so that I can pay rent and things like that. So, the last one that we're going to talk about is return fraud, and that's a blind spot that I think it goes hand in hand with first party fraud. I read a stat the other day that return fraud cost retailers over $100 billion in 2024, which is similar in cost to first party fraud. Um, so return fraud, I think it can mean a couple different things. How would you define return fraud versus, maybe just like return abuse? Do you have a metric for that, or is it kind of the same thing?
So that's a really good question. So, I'm thinking real world experience, right? Where we've all done it, right? No one says where you have something and it may be broke, and you go back to the store, you buy the exact same thing, and you return the one that may be broke, right? Like, oh, I look at that as like abuse, right? Where it is what it is, right? But it's abuse. Let's be honest, right? Versus, I'm gonna buy something, right? And then I'm gonna ship back a box full of bricks, right? There's clearly fraud there, right? Now the end result would still be the merchant, like, the bricks, they can't sell the bricks, nor can they sell that damaged piece of merchandise I gave them back, right? So the merchant's still at a financial loss from that perspective. They may see it no different. But I think, just like I kind of justified it there, as a human, maybe we may justify it differently. Like, hey, I didn't intentionally plan to do this abuse, but because it broke, but I'm gonna use the return policy to make my world better and get my new toy back, and versus, I bought the toy, I had no intention of paying for this toy, therefore I bought it knowing I was going to ship them bricks back, right? I think there's probably a distinguisher there. I think you look at volume and velocity too, to look at abuse versus fraud. To put it nicely, I would assume, right, bad word there, but people who are abusing it's sporadic, right? It's an opportunity thing, right? Versus individuals who are that are committing fraud. It is not opportunistic. It is strategic, right? It is they're doing it. There's a pattern. There's a reason.
I'm going to return the bricks, or some of the other examples that you gave. That's a real clear example. I think maybe what the intention is at the purchase, right? So if you're purchasing something with the intention to return it,
Yeah,
so if a company has such lax return policies that you can use it for a month and then whatever the product is and then return it, I think that's another area where it kind of it blurs the line, right?
yeah,
So it's not somebody that's maybe just taking advantage of a return policy, but is maliciously making a purchase with the intent to
yeah.
to to
The
use
intent's
it and
almost
return
different
it
than the
or
proof, right?
whatever it is.
Because during the initial transaction, you're not able to see into the mind of the purchaser, right, or the customer.
Yeah.
You have no idea what their intent is, right? The intent is only after the fact, and honestly, the intent could change, right? Again,
Yeah.
purchase all the stuff, then I lose my job, right? I got all the stuff now. What am I going to do with it, right? All right, well, I want to keep it, so I'm going to do some fake returns, right? And so the intent changed when they made that purchase. There was no intent to commit return fraud, right? That changed
Right.
2 months later to an economic scenario. So yeah, I think it all depends. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
difficult to pierce into the brain of humans and understand what their intent is. It's very challenging.
Yeah. So, and we had talked about the first party fraud and the return fraud and the correlation between that for us. When we talk to a merchant, a lot of times what merchants will do is they will, have such lax return policies because what they're trying to do is they're trying to prevent chargebacks, right? Because chargebacks come with fees, and then you don't even have a chance to get the product back. And so the returns are, in most cases, I think preferred, but once you have those no questions asked return policies, 90-day return policies, like even no ship back return policies. We've seen instances where merchants will not require the product be shipped back. They'll just, really just have a really, really lax return policy. And while, as a consumer, I appreciate that, and I find it hard to argue against doing that. If you're a merchant and you're really trying to understand what your fraud liabilities are, you have to take into account return abuse and return fraud. You can't look at just the top line first party fraud, right? So if you're able to cut first party fraud in half, but in doing so, you triple the amount of just even returns that you have to deal with. The net cost of that first party fraud is actually greater. So it's an instance where the solution is worse than the problem. So I think that there's it's like sometimes I talk about it like a balloon, you know what I mean? Like you fix one thing and it sort of creates another problem. And merchants need to be super aware of, how all these different decisions that they make are connected. Is there anything else? I mean, those are, so we talked about return fraud, first party fraud, account takeover, and the ACH fraud that you had talked about. What is, is there anything that you want to add sort of, that is on your mind lately, or that is kind of, a trend that you see coming down the pike that merchants should be aware of?
Yeah, but it goes beyond merchants. I would say it's anybody who's a quote unquote fraud fighter. I think there's a passing and changing of the guard, to put it nicely. Clearly, I'm not a young buck anymore, and there feels like there's a little bit of a gap in fraud fighting between my generation of workers and next generation of fraud fighters. And I think it's really important that we pass our knowledge down, but also make sure that individuals understand, look, there's a career in fraud prevention, right? You don't have to go in, nothing wrong with law enforcement, don't get me wrong, right? But you don't have to go into law enforcement. You don't have to go, there's things you can do in fraud prevention across, again, retail, banking, insurance, healthcare, government, right? There's lots of places there around fraud prevention. So that's what I would just kind of say, don't be afraid to pass the torch and to help cultivate that torch going forward.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's very similar game, right? Whether you're on the good side or the bad side. If you enjoy the cat and mouse of it all, why not put your skills to use on the good side?
Yeah.
Maybe not quite as lucrative, but you also don't end up doing 10 years behind bars. So thank you so much for joining me today. This was a real great conversation. I like to end every podcast with some rapid fire questions. Are you game?
Sure. Let's do it.
All right. So we're just looking for quick answers, sort of like James Lipton. I don't know if you've ever seen Inside the Actor Studio, but all right. First one is crypto or cash?
Cash. I don't believe crypto is a currency. Crypto is a commodity.
All right. Sailboat or RV?
Sailboat. Why would I want a house with wheels on it?
All right. In 10 years, will AI have a positive, a net positive or net negative impact on society?
Positive, for sure.
All right. What's the best business advice you ever received?
Years ago, a leader told me I never want to be surprised. So from now on out, I always say you never surprise your leader. So make sure they're always communicating and understanding what's going on. But you never want your leader to come to you and say, "What's this all about?"
Yeah. So somebody said, I just got off the phone with someone. Can you? All right, and then your favorite safe for work one-liner.
Okay, so I'm a little controversial, but I'll call this safe for work. I always got to start my presentations off sometimes to jar the audience. As I say, there are no dumb questions, just dumb people. And that usually gets people's attention pretty quickly, which obviously is not true, but it's something my little own one-liner I came up with to get people's attention. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it. I like it. Well, there is no
Depends.
doubt. Yeah, that's what they say at the beginning of every Q&A session.
Right.
There is no dumb questions, and then almost invariably somebody will prove them wrong.
Yeah, it's okay.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today,
Absolutely.
and I'll let you know when we put this out, and I appreciate the
Yeah, no,
conversation.
good stuff. Yeah, let me know when it comes out. Happy that we can share on our socials, etc. So, but I do have to hop to another one, unfortunately. But pleasure as always, and let's stay connected, and we will cross paths somewhere in a conference next 3 months. A bunch of conferences. So
That
hopefully we
sounds
can get
great.
out there.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye out for you.
Yes, sir.
All right, thanks, Steve.
Absolutely.